Hi, I'm Moshe, and I'm autistic.
I'm Leah, and I'm boring. Welcome to the Now You Know One Autistic podcast.
The opinions expressed in this podcast reflect one autistic and one Leah, and don't necessarily reflect the entire autistic community.
Let's get to it. Hi, Moshe.
Hi, Leah.
How are you, honey?
I'm good. I'm really, really good.
I'm really glad. So it's been a while. We came back with a huge bang recently after a couple of weeks of not recording, where we spoke to, what we consider, we're huge fans, the most famous autistic in the world. And she had a lot to say about her opinions, which we agree with. So everybody should check that one out.
Yeah, it was a huge honor for us to have the opportunity to speak for about an hour to Dr. Temple Grandin. It was last night for us, but it'll be whenever you listen to the episode for you. And we spoke on a variety of different topics. It was something that we've been working on getting for a long time. I wish that we could have gotten her out to personally speak with her, but it was just not possible for us to bring her from Colorado to Jerusalem for the interview. So the audio quality was done over the telephone, but it was a really, really good interview. And if you go to episode 30, I think we're at episode 30 now.
That's amazing.
Episode 30, you can listen to our chat with Dr. Temple Grandin. It was unscripted. It was without any clear topic in mind. So we just, by her request, it was just a talk that we all had with Dr. Grandin. It was fantastic. So you should go back and check it out.
You should. So today we're going back to our original formula, which is Moshe and I.
Yep. We don't have any guests today. It's just Leah and Moshe talking about something.
Usually something that recently happened that brings up a topic that has to do with neurodiversity. And today is no different. So the topic that we're going to try to tackle today, it's a huge topic, so we're going to have to drill down on a couple of aspects of it, is delay in emotional processing.
Yeah, so we talked a lot in the past few episodes or thereabouts regarding the fact that people on the spectrum have a processing delay, people with ADHD, with autism, with some kind of neurodivergency. I don't think we've ever really agreed on whether neurodiversity and neurodivergency is more...
I say divergent more often, but I think they're both correct.
Okay. So like how people with neurodiversity or neurodivergency have a processing delay. So when they receive information, it can take them anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours to...
I've heard days.
A few days to really sort of drill down on how... Not only how they feel about it, that's actually the topic we're going to discuss, but what they think about it. So it actually takes a while to sort of filter through the parts of their brain to get to the place where they go, now I understand, or now it's ingrained, or now I know what you said.
So I think what I'd like to do is talk about what brought it up and then talk a little bit about the mechanics of what might be happening with somebody who's struggling with this. So it's hard for me to think of a specific thing, but Moshe will have these issues where he'll behave in a certain way. He'll behave like he's annoyed, or he'll behave like he's exasperated, or like he's disinterested. And then when he's called out on it, like, why are you annoyed by this? He'll be like, I'm not annoyed. I feel happy about it. And then you would ask him, well, if you feel happy about it, why is your behavior saying that you're annoyed? And then he would have no idea. But it would be very, very important to him that he knew how he was feeling, and the rest of the world had to accept that he was happy about this. But it was kind of hard to swallow because he was acting not happy about it. So explain your experience with that.
So it's processing delay, but it's also the same kind of insecurity and lack of control and masking that is sort of hallmark of being on the spectrum. And all of these things we have spoken about in past episodes. We did episode or two on masking, and we did a lot of talking on, I think our second episode maybe was, or maybe our third episode ever was on the uncanny valley of autism.
Yeah, we still like that.
So it all kind of factors in to what's sort of in play here. And essentially, a lot of it is from my own experience, because if you lack the ability, first of all, to understand emotion, as a lot of people on the spectrum do, of course, not all, because again, when you know one autistic, you know one autistic. But the mechanism that goes into having a fully formed, fully baked, if you will, emotion, it's not impossible, but it's a challenge.
Sometimes it's delayed. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you know how you feel.
Sometimes you do. It's not to say that it's universal, and it's not to say that it's uniform across the board.
I find with you, it's more with unfamiliar emotions or unexpected emotions.
Yes.
Like if I hug and kiss you, you're going to smile and hug and kiss me back. That's a familiar emotion. But like if, I don't know, Avram does something new, and exciting that's annoying, you might act annoyed, but then say that you're okay with it, but you're not.
It's a challenge to really understand new data, because essentially when you take in an outside stimuli, be it a word or a noise or a sound or smell or something like that, your body has to figure out how it's going to respond to it. And in neurotypical people, for the most part, I imagine a lot of it is instant. This light is too bright. This smell is too strong. This person is really upsetting me. But for an autistic or someone on the spectrum, it's not necessarily so clear cut, and it certainly doesn't always take that half a second that it might take for someone who doesn't have a processing delay. So what'll happen, for example, is I will have a conversation with someone, or something will happen, or I'll read something, and I will not form the emotion attached to what I read or heard or saw. My body will sometimes react before my mind processes it. So, for example, I'll read about a really tragic story, and my energy will be down, and my lack of motivation will be down, and I'll be in a subdued mood, and Leah might say, what's with your face? Like, what's going on? And my response will be, I don't know what you mean. I feel fine. Like, I don't know what, well, you seem a little down, and you seem like not yourself. Is there something going on that that's making you feel that way? I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. I feel fine. And then through conversation, because obviously I don't want this sort of hanging in the air, but through conversation, I will speak to Leah and go, you know what? I actually did read this really sad story earlier today, and it's just been on my mind all day. And I think it really upset me, but I didn't really understand it at the time. Or if it's allowed to proceed to the logical conclusion, I'll get to the point where I'll be like, oh my gosh, that thing that I saw yesterday is so upsetting.
Right.
And then I'll react to it.
And then I'll say, what thing?
Yeah. And I'll be like, I read this thing yesterday morning, and it just really bothered me.
Yeah.
And I just realized it now.
Whereas if you want to talk about a neurotypical, or not even necessarily a neurotypical, because there's many types of neurodivergent, but somebody without a processing delay, it's not that this doesn't happen. It's just that we discuss this a lot. Our brain is on automatic and yours is on analog.
Yes.
So what will happen for me is I'll get a stimulus, whatever, and the initial emotion will be, oof, that's annoying. But right away, my brain will go through the filter. Is it worth being annoying? What's actually happening? Should you react that way to that? No, it's probably okay. And then I'll have the appropriate reaction. But that all happens on automation. Whereas for you, that might take, like you said, minutes, hours, even days. But you're having that initial reaction of that initial emotion or feeling that your brain threw up there. Not threw up like vomiting. I mean, like literally it comes from the inside of your brain and comes up to the executive function, where it's just being more slowly processed by
Right.
It's your frontal lobe, I guess.
So it's talking about the idea of emotional regulation, which is another common topic.
Moshe and I had this talk a couple of days ago, and we laughed and laughed how like you're on stick shift and I'm on automatic, the transmissions of the brain.
Yes. It's maybe we can write a book one day called the gears of the brain or something like that. But we liken the brain to a car transmission. Now, despite the outwardly male appearance, I'm not necessarily as into cars as some guys, but I do know transmissions, and I have been driving for a number of years. And the neurotypical brain is very much like on automatic, where you get into the car and you shift into drive, and as you go, the car automatically shifts you through the gears so that you get to the correct gear depending on your speed and depending on all the factors that go into it. Whereas the autistic brain or the neurodivergent brain is very much like a stick shift, like a standard transmission, where you hit the gas and immediately the needle goes into the red, and you're moving hardly at all, and you're just starting to smell smoke, and then your transmission is burnt out, and $5,000 later, it's a thing. But you actually have to...
It's a good metaphor, but what that looks like in real life, for example, is you will... I don't know. Again, I'll come back to Abram. It tends to happen with him a lot because he's unpredictable. He's the most unpredictable person in the house, and you have an issue with unpredictability.
I do.
Where he'll do something and you'll sort of be short with him, and then the next day you'll say, oh, I feel so bad for being short with him, because you'll finally have processed that what he did wasn't that big of a deal.
Right. So I have to take myself through the gears, if you will, where something will happen, say with him, say with you, say with anyone, and it has to sort of enter the brain and go, wow, that was a really annoying thing. And then I'll have to shift into second and go, okay, well, was that intentional or was it meant to upset me? No? Okay, we'll shift into third. Okay, so is it something that I should discuss, or is it something that I should just let go? And then I shift it to fourth and go, okay, so it's nothing that's that important, and it was obviously not intentional. So I don't think that it's worth me reacting to.
Fourth is usually I'll talk to Leah about it later when I go to bed.
Right. but it takes me through the whole slew of things where I say normal, I don't like that word, but the neurotypical brain would go from stimuli to response very quickly. For someone on the spectrum, it does take a little bit longer, and sometimes you need to work through it. And Leah and I, over the years, have come up with flowcharts.
Mm-hmm. We should actually draw those.
We really should.
We should ask Abram to draw.
We should. And it really comes down to someone said something. You said something. Abram said something. Raya said something. Somebody at work said something. Somebody on the street said something. The guy behind the counter at the post office said something. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is, how do I feel about that? Well, I don't know. So if you don't, do you know how you feel about this? That's the first flow chart. What emotion does this make you feel? Usually it's a positive or a negative, rather.
I'm going to stop you right there. Let's go back to the flow chart, but I want to stop you right there.
Okay.
Because one of the biggest arguments that we've had until you came to the conclusion on your own after me harassing you about it was you were insistent that the emotion you said you were feeling was the emotion. And how dare anybody say or tell you how you feel? And the results-based evidence was you don't feel that way because you're acting not that way.
So this really goes back to an old episode that we did. And actually, if you go back, I'm trying to think of it. Not the last episode, because I was on with Dr. Grandin, but the episode before that, I think we did a talk on my self-esteem and my metric for how I value myself. And I'm pretty sure that during that one, we discussed that one and several others in the past, because it's kind of an ongoing thing, where I had to build this facade because I was an undiagnosed autistic with no support at all. Mm-hmm. No one even suggested until I was in my 40s that I might be autistic. So I was difficult, I was dramatic, I was over the top, I was a liar, I was dishonest, I was histrionic.
Sure.
So we just kind of worked out that I had to build this facade for myself, this wall, this barrier, this suit of armor, where everything that I was doing was intentional. Every action that I took was meaningful. Everything that I felt was important was important. Everything that I didn't think was important wasn't important. And everything I did was for a purpose. And then we had to sort of smash that whole thing down.
Yeah, but except deep down on the inside, you had to know that that wasn't the case.
Right. But that level of insecurity, that little voice in my head that was constantly repeating for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you have no idea what you're doing, was constantly being shut up because I had no support. I had no diagnosis. I had nobody who was going to take my side for the most part. I thought. This is all perception, of course. This is not reality because I actually probably had lots of people who were happy to help me if I was willing to accept their help.
Probably.
But I had to tell myself that if it truly meant that I had no idea what I was doing, then what do I do?
Like, how do I fix this?
How do I fix this? I don't know how to fix it.
Right. Because again, no diagnosis, no support. But I think there's a lot that goes into it. So our discussions would often go like this. How dare you? You can't tell me how I feel. And I would say, I'm not telling you how I feel, but I am telling you this is not how you feel. Right. This is how you don't feel. So can we discuss more? And then that would just shut it down because you didn't want to. Until you came to it eventually on your own.
Because it
with a lot of annoying for me, but eventually on your own.
Because it required me to, the sort of going into the comparison to the 12 steps that people who go through Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. The first step is admitting that you're powerless.
Right.
And I had to get there on my own. I wasn't in like the Autistics Anonymous.
That's true.
That's the AA that we don't talk about.
Even right after your diagnosis, you still tried to walk this line where you were like a grown up and a big boy, but you still had an autism diagnosis. So
right.
You totally knew what you were doing, but you also had to be accommodated. You were trying to walk this line that just doesn't exist in life.
Because you have to defend yourself. Because when you're a child who's acting out, you have your mom and your dad or a relative or a guardian or a caregiver who's going to support you. And you go to the parent-teacher interviews and you go to the school meetings and, Moshe doesn't behave and he never listens and he throws his books out the window all the time and he zones out and he's completely he doesn't do, he's always on his own and on and on and on you go. But people expect that you are going to hit milestones. And one of the things that is so mind-blowing for a lot of people is the milestones don't stop just because your child is a year old or 2 years old.
Right.
You get milestones throughout your life. You could be 45 years old and still have milestones.
Absolutely.
But nobody cares about them because you don't have a pediatrician who's going to go through the chart and go, okay, you're 37 years old. Have you, do you know how to balance your checkbook?
Yeah.
Do you know how to do your budget? Oh, you're not meeting your milestones. You're in the 80th percentile on this. But
yeah.
I mean, you might get there if you have
nobody's measuring your cranium at 37.
Yeah. Okay. So based on the size, based on the amount of teeth you have, I think you're struggling with social cues. Yeah. They don't go through the milestones because I was holding my head up mostly. I was walking mostly. No, I was doing all of the basic things. But you don't look at a 40-year-old and question his milestones.
Unless you get very, very close to him.
Unless you're very close to him.
It took me a while even. And so I was like, you don't know what you're doing, do you? And it took a while.
Right. But you have to admit it to yourself because you have to defend. And even today, in me being a podcaster of some repute, I hope, with a full-time job and a partner and children and a bank account and credit cards and stuff, even today, I don't go into every single environment and go, hi, my name is Moshe and I'm autistic.
Yeah, you can't.
There are still people in my life who are very close to me that don't know that I'm autistic.
Right. People are going to be like a couple of things. The majority of the time it's not. Really? No, your son is autistic. Did you say the wrong word? Or did you say the wrong person?
Right.
That's the majority. Or other people will be like, yeah, who cares? Do you know how to can you pay your credit card this month? I don't care if you're autistic.
Right.
And that's the majority of the reaction. It's not like when your 3-year-old can't talk and everybody's like, oh no, we have to intervene, you know.
Right. And again, we talked about that with Dr. Grandin last night, and there's a lot of really interesting things. You should look at that episode. But we get to the point where if you present that you are autistic in your everyday life, it really, like, we should do like a graph. It gets to a point after a certain age where being autistic is actually more of a hindrance than a help.
Absolutely.
Unless it gets to a point where you have no choice. Like in a previous job, Leah has different opinions. But I was constantly being criticized for my lack of candor and being too honest and saying the wrong thing and being too forward. And she's like, you were really rude to that customer. Like, I don't understand where that would come from. And then I did have to self-disclose. I'm actually autistic, and I do struggle with, with communication and presenting ideas in certain ways.
But the problem is managers don't know what to do with that.
Right.
Because they think, autistics wouldn't have even gotten this far. Like, they don't know what to do.
Right. Especially
they're like,
the older
oh, sorry, I guess I won't correct you ever. Like, they don't know how to deal with that.
Right. Because the understanding, it really differs. It really does differ based on your environment and your position. For example, we lived for a while in arguably one of the most liberal, woke places in the country of Canada, not of Israel, obviously. And I disclosed several times that I was autistic. And they basically said, here are the accommodations we're willing to do, and here are the ones we're not willing to do. And not even a doctor's letter saying he is not able to do these things was enough, because they're like, we can't help you.
Yeah, they're like, sorry, that's the position. You clearly made it here, so figure it out.
Like, I've worked in customer service for many years, many years, most of my adult life, actually. And
ironic.
Yeah. I just discovered it was a thing that I fell into. And I've worked in a lot of call centers, and I'm no stranger to accommodations. And when I first presented the idea of accommodations, because we did an episode several months ago about reasonable and unreasonable accommodations, and someone actually approached me and said, that's not the right word, because an accommodation is like what someone does at work. Like, you need a specific desk, or you need an ergonomic chair.
Right.
What you're not talking about, like when you're talking about, having dim light bulbs in your house, you're having, certain hours that you're allowed quiet time. That's not an accommodation.
That's reasonable versus unreasonable, though, because when you think about somebody who has tiny arms, for example.
Right, I was going to say.
Or when you're thinking of somebody who is in a wheelchair, so needs everything lower, it's literally the difference for them of being able to do the job versus not being able to do the job.
Right.
So they have to be accommodated. People misunderstand autism in a way, whereas if you're constantly in sensory overload, you actually can't do your job. So
Right.
Some of the accommodations are not only reasonable, but necessary. So if you say to them, every hour I need 10 minutes off the phone because I need to, calm down my overstimulation from talking to all these upset people, that is actually the difference for you being able to finish your shift or tapping out an hour early because you just weren't able to,
And I mean, some of these accommodations are baked into the jobs. I interviewed a couple of times several years ago for a 911 operator. Mm-hmm. And part of the job was that you get a half an hour off the phone. Like you work for a half an hour and then you're off for half an hour.
Well, it has to be.
Because you have to just take a break.
Yeah, but that's understood that that's too much stress even for a neurotypical brain. Like, that is a job that they understand this.
But it's not, it's beyond someone why something like inbound calls, especially if it's not even sales, especially if it's just delivering information in a purely customer service role, would result in somebody needing time off. Like, you're not talking someone back from, heaven forbid, the death of their child. You're literally explaining to someone which mailbox they should buy or which medication they would best be suited by, or whether or not they checked the right box on their healthcare application.
Well, because again, it comes down to relativity. Relatively speaking, a neurotypical brain is too stressed out by having to talk down a shooter or somebody wanting to jump off a roof.
Right.
But relatively speaking, an autistic brain is just as stressed out by having to interact with people. The social battery goes down.
Right.
Or if they're upset, you have to then take on that emotion. Or if you can't find the information that they want and it's frustrating. Like, that is stressful for anybody, but extra stressful for you, maybe as stressful as me talking someone down from a roof.
But I'll tell you an interesting thing, actually, because I want to kind of swerve the wheel back to the actual topic. When we're talking about trying to find emotion and not understanding what they are, feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed is the same type of thing as being upset. Because, like I said, you end up in this position where your body responds before your mind catches up. And if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'll zone out. My mind will go blank. I'll be sitting there in after call or not ready or whatever you want to call it for just like 20 minutes.
And it seems lazy.
And just be like, it's not like I'm consciously going, okay, I am stressed. This is what I'm going to do about it. It's like I'll be a little bit slower to process, or I won't take calls as back to back as I was, or my notes will get less detailed. Like, there'll be a physical reaction before there'll be an emotional reaction. And what'll happen is that you'll come into the room and say, you've been in unready for half an hour. What's going on? And I'll say, oh, you know what? I'm actually really overwhelmed. And I didn't actually know that I was overwhelmed until about 20 minutes in.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew that I could not take any more calls for right now. And I'm very fortunate, actually, that I have a position where
There's always other work to do.
I do have the ability, okay, you know what? I'm going to not take calls for a while. I'm going to actually work on emails, or I'm actually going to focus on like these things, or I'm just going to take some time to do this. I can kind of pick and choose depending on the urgency, and especially if the calls are not coming in back to back to back to back to back,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the things that I do are also outbound, which I do find a lot more stressful depending on what I'm doing. And I find outbound to be very stressful.
I understand, because you're bothering people. You don't know if it's a good time. You don't know if they're there.
Even if it's for their benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not selling a magazine subscription or doing a survey. I'm literally telling them they need something that I'm now offering them, which I know that they need it because they needed it before and they must need it again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely like the worst that they're going to say. And this is something that they tell you actually when you're doing outbound surveys or cold calling. The person may hang up on you. The person may yell at you, but they can't actually physically harm you. So even if you're bothering them and they get really frustrated, the worst that'll happen is they'll yell at you and call you a few stupid names and then hang up the phone.
Right.
They're not going to like reach through the receiver and strangle you or whatever.
Yeah.
And
I mean, sometimes it can feel that way, though.
I briefly interviewed for a really shady position where we were doing something that I don't actually even remember. It was so insignificant. And somebody in the interview actually asked the person, well, what happens if we call someone and they don't want, and they're not happy? Like, what if they don't want what we're offering them? And the guy said, hold on a second. He picked up the phone, he dialed a random number, said, hi, ma'am, could you tell me the color of your underwear, please? And then she hung up on him, and he hung up and said, see, guess what? I didn't die. She didn't kill me. She just hung up on me.
Right. That's kind of crap, though. That's not really a good thing. Like, it's not really a good example to give people.
It's not a great example.
Especially when you're like a legitimate customer service person like we are. I am the opposite. I have zero feelings. I am a robot. Somebody can yell at me and I can hang up and I can talk to the next person. But that's, I think, just like years of numbness. But
right.
Going back again to the original topic, though. This is another good case for early intervention.
Absolutely.
Because I'll tell you what we did for Avram that would have really helped you, which is when he was a baby, we would pick him up and stick him in a mirror and go, look, you're smiling. You feel happy. Oh, look, you're frowning. That's sad. And not only for his own face, but pictures of faces. What does this person feel?
Like social stories.
Little Sally is crying. How do you think she feels? And that was, I know a lot of people say maybe it's dumb, but that was an early intervention. That was just as important for him as turn taking or speech therapy. Like,
yes. I keep referring back to the chat we had with Dr. Grandin last night because it was phenomenal. And I urge you once more time, and I promise this is it, please listen to it. Like I said, the audio quality is not the best, especially on her end, because again, from Colorado to Jerusalem, it's a heck of a distance to travel.
We did our phone
line. But one of the things that she talked about that was actually crucial, because we talked about the basics like eye contact and whatever, is that it's not only desirable, but necessary in early intervention for neurodivergent children to teach them the very basic.
Yes, but what you want to do is teach them the basics that are going to make them successful.
Right.
You don't need to teach them, again, to look in somebody's eye or to have a firm handshake, things like that. But you do need to teach them, hey, when my mouth is smiling, I feel happy. Until this day, if Avram doesn't know what he's feeling, which isn't really that big of a problem for him, it shows that early intervention works.
Mm-hmm.
He can look in the mirror and go, my face is happy. Okay, I'm happy.
Right. And that works for me now, but it was not something that I was used to.
To be honest with you, while we were having this argument, I think I kind of did it with you. Because you were like, I'm fine. And then I was like, look in the mirror. Does your face look fine?
Right.
And you were like, oh.
Because I struggle, and currently struggle, I suppose, with the concept of personal feelings matching external results. Because like I said, I will react to things before I understand what I'm reacting to and why I'm reacting that way. So,
right. So a lot of times it's like, that thing kind of pissed me off. And me trying to help you, I guess, process your feelings. And so what?
Right.
So that doesn't mean you get to act that way toward people.
Right. So that comes into emotional regulation as well, because on one hand, you have to identify what the emotion is, which is very important. You know, when this happens, it's okay to be sad. When this happens, it's okay to be mad. When someone talks meanly to you, it's okay to be upset. But that's important because identifying the emotion is like step one.
That's also kind of a little bit scary because we're all taught to teach children that any emotion they have is okay. But the reality of the situation is not every emotion is okay in every situation.
No.
That's really nuanced.
It really is. And it's, again, nuance. That's the autistic N-word. Because it's very difficult because nuance is so unable to be held down. Because if you say to someone, well, what's nuance? It is. It's nuanced. Nuance is nuance.
Absolutely. And if you teach every kid that every emotion is okay, then you have to say, well, hitting other kids and biting them is okay.
Right.
We have a really funny story, actually, where Avram was in pre-K,
mm-hmm.
and they called me to tell me that he had been bitten. And do you know what my first reaction was? Oh, thank God he was the one that was bitten and didn't do the biting. Right. Because it's so much easier to deal with making him feel better from getting bitten than a kid who thinks biting is okay.
Right. Because reaction, especially when you have a child that is not clear on proper expressions of, emotional regulation. And again, this is not the fault of being neurodivergent. If you're like 3 or 4 years old, you're not necessarily always going to know how to respond to emotions because it's not like an autistic thing. It's a common child thing. But normally they figure it out. If you're upset, they teach you how to react to being upset. Mm-hmm. When you're feeling angry, what are some things that you can do when you're angry that don't hurt other people? When you're sad,
use your words.
Use your words
to yourself.
Yeah, all those things. When you're sad, what are some, healthy expressions of being sad? Happy is always great. But like the negative stuff.
Not always. If you see a dead cat on the side of the road and you're happy about it, you have to examine that too.
Well, that's a little bit different.
But I've seen it.
It has, because not being clear about what a proper expression is, and expectations are important. Dr. Grandin talks a lot about how she grew up in the 50s and she learned manners.
She expressed to us basically that every adult in her life essentially was giving her ABA because they were correcting every poor behavior she had and giving her rewards when she did the thing and giving her consequences when she didn't.
But nowadays, the modern conception of that is that's horrible, that's awful. Why can't you just let them be themselves? Dr. Grandin does come from an earlier school, but I would argue the school that I support. Because yes, absolutely, if you're autistic and you have a child or a young adult that's struggling in certain ways, there needs to be some, not all, but some accommodation for it. But you have to also teach them how to operate.
Yeah.
Even if it's fake, even if it's scripted.
Now, she said in the 50s, adults had a lot of authority. So even store clerks would correct her. But even
Yes.
then, they gave her reasonable accommodations. They wouldn't say you can't touch anything, but they would say you can only touch a few things in the store and the things that you're interested in buying, because she was
Right.
touching everything, for example.
But learning manners. When someone says, "Hi, how are you?" You're supposed to respond, "I'm fine, thanks." Teaching small talk, which is something that I've discussed, I struggle with. What's the point of small talk? Why do people have to engage in small talk? Well, it's because that is how people communicate.
I remember I literally had to express to you because you said you hated it because it was fake. But I sort of pulled back the veil for you a little bit and I said, we all know it's fake. Everybody engaging in it knows it's fake. It's just like a security blanket. If you don't engage in it, it makes people think you're weird or wrong or awkward somehow. We all know it's fake.
Exactly. It's the, "Hey, how's it going?" Or "What's up?" Or "How's it going?" Like, "How you doing now?" Or "How are you feeling?"
It happens to me in my job
Or "How are you today?"
every day. People call me, "Hey, how you doing today?" Anyway, this is what I need. Like, they don't even wait for you to answer because they don't care. It's fake for everyone, but it's just ingrained for whatever reason.
But sometimes they wait for a response, and you have to give a response. And the response is generally fine or okay.
No one wants to know, like, if your pinky toe hurts. It's the reality.
And you have to learn the appropriate response. Dr. Grandin was taught that when someone greets her, she has to respond by, "Hi, I'm Temple Grandin." And she would do that over and over and over and over, because that was the scripted response that was expected of her.
Mm-hmm.
And in those instances, and in all these instances, it's better to answer with a scripted response than not at all. Because people expect it. As you said, people know it's fake. If you ask someone, "How you doing?" 99.9% of the time, they're going to say fine and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to give you their whole life story and why their toe hurts. And
I do that to be obnoxious.
Bad morning,
like,
whatever.
I do that to people, but I do it to be obnoxious. Like, I'm actually a little hungry and my left toe, I stubbed it. Like, but I'll be doing that if I'm trying to be annoying to someone.
But you told me that. I said, "I struggle with that." And you said, "Just say fine and move on." Like, that's all they want to hear from you. It doesn't have to be like a whole federal court case. They ask you how you're doing. We know you hate small talk. Just say fine and move on with the conversation.
Because ironically, it's the fastest way out of the small talk, which you hate anyway. So
Exactly.
Just do it.
So
So anyway, emotions.
I've learned to adapt to small talk, but that is part of the emotions. Like these sorts of things have to do with emotions, because I talk a lot about these half-baked things. Like, you make cookies. You make cookies, chocolate chip cookies. Everyone likes chocolate chip cookies. You make chocolate chip cookies. You put them on the pan, you put them in the oven. You set it for whatever you set it for, 10 minutes, something like that. And when they're done, you pull them out and you go, "This is a chocolate chip cookie." And then it's delicious and you eat it. And then once you turn your head for a second, it's gone. Like, there's no more cookies. They're all eaten.
Mm-hmm.
But when you know you're making cookies, you know that the cookies have to be done. And this is actually a way that you would talk to a child. And this is therefore the way that I talk to myself. Because in a lot of ways, the way I rationalize things is like you would talk to a child. And you would say, "If I was making you chocolate chip cookies and you love chocolate chip cookies," because who doesn't love chocolate chip cookies, "would you prefer the cookies to come out of the oven baked? Or would you like me to put them in for like 30 seconds, pull them out and go, 'Here you go. Here's a whole wad of dough for you'?"
Right.
Not to say that chocolate chip cookie dough isn't also a thing, but that is how you deal with emotions. Is it better to react to something when you're not really sure what it is? You have this initial reaction. You walk into the kitchen, you go, "Oh, it smells like cookies. Guess I'm taking them out and eating them now."
Mm-hmm.
You go, "No. First you smell the cookies, then you wait for them to be done, then you take them out of the oven.
Right.
First you feel the emotion, then you go, okay, what's this emotion? How is it making me feel? What is the appropriate response? Is it a valid emotion? Is it a negative emotion? Is it an emotion based in fact? And once that emotion's fully baked, then you can take it out of the oven and hand it to someone. What you said made me upset, and here's my cookie. You know,
Yeah.
you wouldn't say, here's a wad of dough, and you look at it and go, why are you giving me this? Well, it smelled like cookies, so I gave it to you.
Yeah.
You wouldn't give a half-baked emotion to someone.
Right. But you said something even more significant when we were discussing this topic.
Right.
You said if you're trying to make chocolate chip cookies, but you put ground beef into it,
Right.
like the wrong emotion is going into it before you even bake it. Like you're not going to put chocolate chips and ground beef into something and call it either a meatloaf or a cookie. Like
Right.
you have to decide what you're making.
You would like hand somebody this cookie made out of ground beef, and you're like, what the heck is this? It's a chocolate chip cookie. It's like, it doesn't look like one. No, it is. I'm telling you,
And
that's what it is.
That's essentially how our conversations went.
Right. Why are you
I was
upset?
like, this is a meatball, Moshe, and you were like, no, it's not. How dare you?
Yeah, why are you so sad? I'm not sad. I'm happy. That's not a cookie. That's a meatball. That's what it was.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just create, like, you wouldn't look at like this meatball with chocolate chips in it and go, well, that's a cookie. You would go, I think.
But you would.
But that's the way I was.
Yeah.
And I would come up with these half-baked or weird or opposite ingredients, just stick them together and go, I think this is a cookie. And you're like, it doesn't look like a cookie to me. Maybe you should look at it and tell yourself, hold it up to the mirror. Does that look like a cookie to you? No, that looks like a meatball with chocolate chips in it. Okay, so did you want
to have a discussion about why you made a meatball with chocolate chip and then it's a whole rabbit hole.
And that is the essence of how emotional processing works.
Like, Moshe, I respect this recipe, but would you like to discuss why you chose to do this?
Exactly.
And it's a whole thing.
Right. So too, you don't want to make chocolate chip meatballs. Maybe you do. I don't know. I'm sure there's a recipe for it somewhere. But you don't necessarily want to make a chocolate chip meatball. You don't necessarily want to act in a negative way to a situation that doesn't call for it. If the situation calls for it, then you should respond with the appropriate response. And I was throwing all of these half-baked things at people and going, here's my emotion. And like, this is not a fully baked emotion. Well, maybe you should take it back and put it in the oven some more. And you'll discover that it's actually not a meatball. It's a chocolate chip cookie or vice versa. So from that amusing analogy.
It's a really good analogy.
We got that before you react to something, you need to let it bake. Number one, because you don't want like a half-baked emotion to be presented, because nobody wants to eat a mound of dough. Maybe they do, I don't know. But also, you have to know what it is. You have to, decide, is this going to be a meatball or is this going to be a chocolate chip cookie? And you don't know if you don't let it finish cooking or whatever. So you have to decide, I feel like I want to be upset by this. But if I let it cook a little bit more and then I look at it, I'll notice that it's actually me feeling bad about something that I did. Or maybe it's not even something worth thinking about at all. Maybe I looked at the oven and I said, that's probably going to be a meatball. And then I opened the oven and it turned out there was nothing in there at all.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you made meatloaf the night before and I thought you were making meatballs now, but there's no meat in the oven.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you think that there's an emotion there. You think you know what the emotion is, but then if you give it a chance to wait and you process it through, it turns out there's no actual emotion at all. That thing that Avram did that I thought was really annoying was just a thing. It wasn't a big deal. It's not even worth talking about. Or that the time that person went to the bathroom or whatever, when I was on the way to the bathroom, it was very frustrating. But upon further thought, they had every right to go to the bathroom. And I was just kind of standing there going, I think I might want to go to the bathroom now. So I'm not going to be mad at them because I took too much time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not their fault.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes an emotion is either not the emotion you think it is, or it's not an emotion at all that's worth having because it goes through the flow chart or whatever. And in those instances, you're not going to get there if you instantly react. But there's a caveat to that. But sometimes a person will expect a default emotion. And if they don't get at least something, then they're going to be like, what's going on here? So, for example, if
That is true.
if someone is like, I don't know, my girlfriend broke up with me, and you're just kind of standing there going, I don't have anything made at the moment. They're going, no, but for this, you need to have this made.
But that's actually a true thing even for neurotypical people. If someone says, my girlfriend broke up with me, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't necessarily care about their girlfriend situation at that time, but I'll have, like you say, some pre-baked cookies in the back.
Right.
Going, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. Would you like to talk more about it? And then sometimes if they talk more about it, then I'll start to develop some feelings about their situation and be able to give them good advice. But I won't necessarily care right off the bat if they say that.
But that is where conditioning comes in, because you don't necessarily need a fully baked emotion for a default situation, because certain things do have to be trained. There's a lot of nuance, and where there's nuance, you have some time in the kitchen to make cookies or meatballs or whatever. Mm-hmm. But for clear-cut situations that only can have one reaction, you do have to have a scripted, sometimes fake response.
Absolutely.
To fill space.
Absolutely.
If someone says, I just got a great new job, you wouldn't say, hold on a second, I have to figure out how that makes me feel. Oh. You're going to go mazel tov, or congratulations, or that's amazing, or good for you. Or my dog just died. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You don't go, you know what? I have to process how that makes me feel. I'll give you a call later and let you know if I'm sad about that. Because the default is you're going to be sad.
You're going to be sad. You're going to be sad later.
You might not feel sad or happy or angry, whatever, at the moment, but you need to give them something. And in that instance, handing them pre-baked cookies, or here's some dough. I don't know what it's meant to be, but here's something.
Everybody's got a package of cookies in the cupboard somewhere.
Right. And if someone comes over because they suffered a tragic circumstance, you need to have those cookies in the back of your cupboard to give them. They might not be the cookies they like. They might not be as good as fully baked cookies that you made yourself. But it's better to give them cookies than just to have them sit there and go, so nothing then? No cookies at all? Not even a cup of coffee or whatever?
Yeah.
So you have to have some pre-baked cookies in the pantry at all times,
right,
just in case that you need to act on the fly. You need to have something ready to go. It's not going to be like the best thing. It's not going to be fully baked even, but it's going to be something.
But that's, again, one of those things that's kind of on, automatic for me and analog for you.
Right.
So sometimes it's helpful for you if you say, in this situation, what should I do? And I give you like 4 things you can say. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to put those in my cookie jar and save them for later.
And scripted responses and templates and macros or whatever you want to call them are really important because, again, we talk about expected response. When someone comes to you with a negative situation, you want to respond with a negative response. If someone says, depending on the situation, if someone said, I just got divorced or whatever, you would say, that's terrible, unless you know that their ex was a terrible person. Then you'd go, that's fantastic. But that's the N-word. That's nuance. You don't know unless you know the situation. For certain things, you don't actually know. And in those instances, depending on the situation, you're going to have to rely on the person's relationship with you. They're going to come to you with a complex situation. They're going to wait for a response from you. And you're going to be like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to feel or do in this instance. Could you give me some time to think about it? Or I'm going to do something, but I have to think about it for a minute or 2 or 5 or 60 or whatever it takes. But that's more for a relationship. When you have a relationship or a partnership or a marriage or whatever with someone,
the person that you're close to can sense when something's disingenuous, so you owe them and that's a thing that we've established is mostly okay in our relationship where you can be like, I don't know how I feel about this. Can I have a second? Or you'll give me like a pre-baked response that we have. So if I'm crying, just hug me and then we can talk about later when you understand what's going on.
Right. And then it doesn't come across as disingenuous, although it might if they don't understand you or if they don't know the situation. But if someone comes to you with some terrible news, your default response might be, I'm really sorry that happened. You might give them a hug. You might express remorse. You might say, that's terrible. If you want to talk about it or if you need some sort of support, I'll be there for you. But then you might go away and like an hour or two later come back and I was thinking about that thing you said. And on top of feeling sorry for what happened, I'm also really angry about it. And here's why. Because now you're presenting the situation as you've thought it. And then the person, if they love you and care about you and understand you, are not going to go, wait a second, why didn't you say that like an hour ago? Why are you giving me a completely different response now?
So that is one thing that in our relationship we had to leave space for.
Right.
So even if something comes up a week later and you need to talk about it, we leave space for that. But there does have to be, especially if I'm upset, like an immediate response. And I told you the default response is there, hug.
Right.
And I'm sorry about that. And can we talk about it more later? Totally acceptable in our relationship, might not be in other people's relationships.
Right. Because you're going to be in the ballpark. We had a discussion about this and I talked about it with you and I expressed concern because I'm like, why would you want an immediate response if it's not fully thought out? And your response, quite rightly, would be, okay, you might not fully feel sadness or whatever based on what I'm telling you, but when you think about it a little bit, you're not going to have like a completely opposite reaction to it.
Right. I mean, if I'm sad, when would you ever not want to hug me and say there? Like, That's a really safe response.
You're sad. There. Yeah. And then I come back 2 hours and go, you know what? I'm actually really happy you're sad about that.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen. So I can pretty much I can cash a check based on this emotion, knowing that there's going to be some emotional money in the bank when the check clears. It's not going to be, wait a second, you don't actually feel sad about this. You feel happy. That's never going to happen unless you're like a terrible person.
Exactly.
And that has to be the response.
That's a positive, but also there have been some negatives. I recall not even too long ago, must have been within the last month or so, where we were having an argument. And I looked at you. I took myself out of this situation, and instead of being your wife at the time, I was somebody who was talking to a neurodivergent.
Right.
And I looked at you and I said, when you realize what an ass you're being, you are going to feel so bad about this.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time you were like, no. And then 2 hours later, you're like, oh, I was such an ass. I'm so sorry. And I was like, see?
Right. And that goes back to the not throwing meatballs at someone until you let them fully bake. Because if you respond to, okay, so as I was sort of explaining it, if you live based on reaction rather than emotion, then a lot of the time you will find that you are going to, as you say, make an ass of yourself. Because if you don't have all the facts, or you haven't fully thought about it, or you haven't considered the whole picture, the theory of mind thing that you talked about with me many times, then you're going to end up having this reaction that once it's out of your mouth or once it's projected, once you set that, like you logging your answer, like, is that your final answer? You're going to rage and slam things and get mad? Is that going to be your final answer to this situation? Or would you like a few more minutes to think about whether or not you want that to be your reaction? Ideally, this is something that's going on internally in your brain, where the brain goes, okay, so this is something that happened. I'm going to storm around and yell at everyone. And then some part of your brain goes, wait a second, I don't know that that's going to have the response that you think it might. Maybe you want to think about that a little bit more. And then you go, you know what? I'm going to change my answer to offer sympathy and support and concern. Mm-hmm. That's final answer. Final answer. and then you win the $1 million. So, I mean, it works out in the end.
Exactly.
So, I mean, emotional processing delay is, ironically, a very nuanced topic because in certain instances it's acceptable, in certain instances it's not, in certain instances, you can offer a response that is within the range of what you're probably going to come to on your own, hopefully. And certain times you really do want to come up with a well thought out plan. And there's a bit of a dovetail, sort of a side quest, if you will, when it comes to emotional processing delay. And that is the struggle that a lot of people, not just neurodivergents, but a lot of people have with saying yes or saying no in certain situations, particularly no.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that? I'm not sure yet. I think that's more on.
Because people in this world, both in Israel and in the West, or, depending on where you're listening to, probably in your own country as well, they have this belief that they ask a question, they need an immediate response, or they ask about a situation and they want a reaction now. Like, what do you mean you need a second to think about it? I need you to answer me now. Can you come or can you not? Like, or is this okay with you or is it not? And then they'll put pressure on you. This is a big thing in sales. Like, no, I need an answer now. Like, this needs to be resolved. And I'm not sure is just like a circle back to, well, what is your chief obstacle? What is holding you back? And
your attitude would be my answer.
Your attitude. My answer is going to be, I have a processing delay, so I can't give you an answer right now. And I don't want to say something that I'll regret.
It's the origin of let me talk to my wife.
Let me talk to my wife.
I say the same thing. Let me talk to my husband. Sometimes I have no intention of doing the thing, but they can't argue with that really.
Right. But people want an answer now. What's wrong? Why can't you tell me? And honestly, in those instances, a lot of people develop a pathology where they really do struggle to say no. Or alternatively, there are people that struggle to say yes because they're so uncertain about everything that are like, are you sure? I don't know. Raya has that problem a lot. Well, which one do you want? I don't know. Which one do you think I want? What do you want to order? I don't know. Could you order for me? Like, just the whole idea.
We're trying very hard to work on that with her. She's very resistant. It's not the end of the world if you want either a hamburger or pasta. It's just
right. But a lot of that does come from a desire to not upset people, and they attach a lot of emotion to choices that are really insignificant.
But really, what is our emotional stake in her dinner choice?
It could be an emotional stake, or it could be, I don't want to choose the soup and then later I'll be like, oh shoot, I should have the salad, or something like. That's a silly example, but that's an example.
No, it's true. Yeah.
Like, what do you want to order? I don't know. Like, I'm not going to, I don't want to order this and then be like, oh, I should have had the lasagna or something. But it's just a meal. Like, it's just food. You'll order it next time. Or they'll do the thing that I used to do where I can't make a decision, so I'll buy everything. I really like this one, but I also like that one. I'm just going to get them both. I'm just going to get them both and eat them both, and then I'll know. I'll know that which one I like.
Yes, and then you'll be 400 pounds.
And
but you'll know.
400 pounds. And then I'll be 400 pounds and be like, you know what?
How did I become 400 pounds? I don't understand.
Do I like banana bread with or without chocolate chips? I should make 2 loaves and eat them both. So that is a dangerous consequence.
You have to make me banana bread. I miss your baking.
We should let bananas, rot a little bit. So, in conclusion, emotional processing delay, much like other kinds of processing delay, it's a part of neurodiversity, neurodivergency, autism, whatever you want to call it. And it does have to be allowed for under many circumstances, although not all. And it's part of those things that make us such unique and oftentimes frustrating people.
Yes, so unique, frustrating, as everything we discuss on the podcast. Difficult, but not impossible. High expectations. So I want to close on that, actually. You and Dr. Temple Grandin both agree on something very interesting because it is so not practiced anymore amongst neurodivergent people.
Right.
Because of the whole accept everything and accept everybody and accommodate everything
right.
culture that we have right now, which is I want for myself somebody to have high expectations and low accommodation of me.
Right.
So why is that?
So it's a great thing to close on, and I do have some programming notes after this, but the Temple Grandin's philosophy and my philosophy is high expectation, low accommodation. Whereas nowadays, especially with the research and advent and all the different things into neurodiversity and the redefinition of it based on the continuing modification of the DSM criteria, we end up in this instance, which is actually the opposite of the way things were in the 50s, probably through to the 90s or maybe even early 2000s, where you have this desire to accommodate everything and everyone about everything in every way. And you are, and Dr. Grandin, her research and her experience many, many years shows it, that you're turning out these autistics who end up going through childhood into adulthood with no skills, with no ability to function, with no ability to do the basics because they were accommodated too much. And you see this, and this is where I'm going to get onto my controversial soapbox, but now I have a partner. I can stand beside the great Dr. Temple Grandin. You have these children who are never made to eat anything more than the foods that they like, who are never made to go anywhere that they don't feel comfortable, who are never made to experience any stimuli that they find irritating or too much, that are never made to be independent because it is easier for their mom or their dad to cook for them, clean for them, dress them, provide them every choice, turn down all the lights everywhere they go, turn down all the music, only take them to the movie theater during, neurodiverse days where the lights are low and the sound is low and the light and the colors are less bright. And I said to Leah, and I said to many people, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Canada, and this was the age of the deathly peanut allergy.
Oh gosh, yes.
And even as a small child, my mother, of blessed memory, was someone who said, quite rightly actually, this is a child that is not meant to live. Not because he has this allergy, absolutely not, but because he is being accommodated to such an extent that he is not going to be able to function.
That's true.
Outside of the real world. Because you can make your schools peanut-free. You can make your home peanut-free. You can even theoretically go to restaurants and businesses that are peanut-free. But you can't control the world. You might be walking down the sidewalk and somebody that ate a peanut butter and jam sandwich might accidentally breathe on you and send you into anaphylaxis.
Yes, tragically and unironically, that boy that you're speaking of did pass away.
He did.
While we were still very young.
Because he thought he was too cool for his EpiPen. And unfortunately, God rest his soul, he was a victim of that overindulgent idea. And granted, autism very rarely leads to a person's death, but it also leads to non-function. And I'm a perfect example, ironically, even though I didn't receive any support. Because when you have early intervention, which Dr. Grandin absolutely supports.
So do we.
So do we. Early intervention doesn't look like doing everything for the child. It looks like teaching the child to do things on their own. You find loud noises to be overwhelming, so you avoid all loud noises? No. You are going to initiate the noises. She told the story about if you have a child that is overstimulated and avoids the sound of the vacuum, give the vacuum to the child and have them turn it on and off a few times. And if they have control over the loud noise and all the action and stuff with the vacuum, they will associate that vacuum, theoretically, with less of an overwhelming experience because they'll have control. They can turn it on when they want to, and if it gets too noisy, they can turn it off. And if they do that enough times, they'll be like, oh, I have control over this noise. It's not so bad anymore. It's like microdosing almost. You teach the child. When you meet someone, you say, hi, how are you doing? When you experience a feeling of overstimulation, you don't punch people around you. You don't bite. You go, I'm feeling overwhelmed now. I'm going to leave the room. Mm-hmm. When you're in a restaurant or a mall and there's a lot of loud noises, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to breathe. Yeah, that's what they told me.
I mean,
in school.
It sounds really cheesy, but it's
They
true.
said to me, don't leave, breathe.
Right.
When you feel overwhelmed, when you feel like you're feeling overstimulated, when you feel on the verge of a meltdown, before it happens, when you can still control it, which oftentimes you can't, but when you can, don't leave, breathe. I know that this is hard for you. I know that this is overwhelming for you. I need you to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths, and you'll see that you are in a good place, you're in a safe place, and everything is manageable. And that is something that they need to teach the child, because I'll tell you something. That little boy that can't go into the mall because it's too noisy, and so he never has to go in the mall, is going to find it very difficult to go outside and have traffic happen, or an ambulance happen, or a workplace where there's a lot of talking and noise and typing.
Also, when you think in terms of adulthood, because you're hoping that your child doesn't die in childhood, right?
They're
going to have to go in the mall. One day they're going to need, scissors or a pair of pants or something.
Right. So small accommodations. What does that look like? Well, he might take a few extra minutes. It's okay if at first he's going to cover his ears, but he's not going to leave. He's going to stay there until he feels better. Or that environment is really noisy, so he's going to walk out for a few minutes, but then he's going to come back. And that's what they told me. They didn't know I was autistic to save their lives. But they said, okay, so you're overwhelmed by the noise and the sound and the crowds and the people. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to stay as long as you can, then you're going to leave. You're going to go outside. You're going to count to 100. Then you're going to go back. You're going to sit down, and you're going to keep trying that. You'll take as many breaks as you need, but you're going to get there. You're going to walk. You're going to talk yourself through it. And then you'll see, and it was true, it sounds hokey, but it's exactly what happened. You'll see.
They Ferberize you in a way.
That one day you'll be sitting in the class going, wow, I've been here for half an hour and I'm not trying to leave. Mm-hmm. Because you're giving yourself, okay, now I'm going to try 5 minutes. Now I'm going to try 10 minutes. Now I'm going to try 20 minutes. And then before long, you'll often find that you'll stop, you'll lose track of, is it 25 minutes, is it 30 minutes? I forget how long. Oh, wait a second. It was an hour. I'm already here. I'm done. Mm-hmm. The class is over, or the environment is over. I want to quickly finish on some programming notes. So we're back now. We had a few unforeseen circumstances that kept us since October, actually. Although if you're listening to this, there's going to be no interruption whatsoever. You just keep going from where you left off. But if you're one of our regular listeners, which we absolutely love, this is going to now go back to your regular weekly schedule, where we're going to try to release at least one episode every week. We can't promise on the day. It'll be when we have some time, and we have some really busy times coming up. And we're going to keep to the weekly schedule as much as humanly possible without interruption. This was unfortunately out of our control. I also want to note that while we were on our hiatus, we passed 8,000 downloads.
Amazing.
So that's just incredible. So as before, we're really, really happy to all the people that continue to tune in to us. We are very popular in the U.S. states of California and Texas. We're really popular in New York. In Canada, we're really, really popular in Ontario and Quebec. And to BC, which is where we were previously to a large extent, that's very popular. We remain very popular in the United Kingdom, particularly in England and Scotland. You Welsh people have to step it up. You're being outdone. We're gaining a lot of popularity in Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Germany, mostly Berlin. So we're getting more audience. Share our podcast, this episode, with all of your friends, all of your family. Each episode is over an hour. So listen to it while you clean the house. Listen to it while you're driving. Listen to it while you go to sleep. I've been told my voice is very soothing at times.
I woke up to your voice this morning.
There you go.
I was listening to my other podcasts and we popped on.
So just do whatever you need. I put up our PayPal link again. Patreon, we really haven't figured out what to do, so I took it down for the time being. But if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, or you really like what I have to say and you want to throw $5 our way, that's great. You can do that. And keep downloading, keep sharing, keep listening. And if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify or Listen Notes or Podcast Addicts, and you have the ability to like or comment, absolutely do that. We read everything that we get. And if you keep liking episodes or podcasts, it'll actually climb it up the listings, which will allow us to get higher in the rankings. We would love to be the number one neurodiversity related podcast in the world. We were able to get Dr. Temple Grandin to appear on the show. We're going to try and get some other guests, both high profile and low profile, in the future. And of course, there'll be a lot more of Leah and I, and we'll try to get the kids on the show at some point in the future.
Okay, so quick, like 2-sentence, summary. It's a lot of work working on your emotion.
It really is.
Tell the listeners why it's worth it in the end.
If you're able to emotionally regulate yourself and you're able to identify why or how to express your emotions, it allows you to be a more fully formed person, and it allows you to function. And the name of the game, and the reason why we started the podcast, is Leah and I, for good or for bad, are in a relationship together because of the work we're putting in. And through all of the ups and downs and trials and tribulations, we have this level of understanding and patience with each other that makes it all worthwhile. And in the end, ultimately, you have love and you get to experience all the wonderful things that come from, being a person who could pursue your dreams.
I was going to say love.
Love is important. Love is all you need.
Love is all you need.
Love is all you need.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you next week.
Well, that's the end of our episode, and now you know one autistic just a little bit better. Now, something you may not know about some autistics is that we often struggle with ending social interactions. So, Leah?
It's okay, Moshe. I'll take care of it. Thank you for listening to Now You Know One Autistic. See you next week.